Now I'd like to talk to you about the subject of ethics, and particularly the 5 ethical principles as required by the ACCA. The ACCA require their members, and that includes student members, to follow 5 ethical principles. And those ethical principles are published on their website, and you can go and check them on the ACCA website. Not that I suspect that you will, but it's my job now to tell you what those principles are. 5 of them, as I say. But before I do so, I'm going to tell you why I'm going to tell you what they say. As it says up there, there's 2 ways that the ethical principles, that ethics can get examined. The first and most obvious way that ethics can get examined is the examiner might say to you, what are the 5 ethical principles? In which case, you just regurgitate the 5 ethical principles. And that's it. Fine. But by far the most common way that ethics is examined is by scenario analysis. So the examiner will give you a scenario, and you will work your way through that scenario, identifying usually weaknesses and problems in ethics. So he will say, he'll give a scenario where there are lots of problems in ethics, and you'll say that's a problem, and that's a problem, and that's a problem, because of blah-de-blah-de-blah. So, what are the 5 ethical principles? Well, let me bring them up for you. Here they are. So, there are 5 ethical concepts, as I've mentioned. They are professionalism, integrity, competence, confidentiality, and objectivity. So, it's professionalism, integrity, competence, confidentiality, and objectivity. Now, I think for you to get a nice feel for this, it works best if I work backwards through these 5. So that's what I'm going to do. So starting with objectivity. It's independence, actually. It's what we would call, in any other circle, independence. An auditor is auditing the financial statements, which go from the directors to the shareholders. The shareholders receive financial statements from the directors, and we must be independent of those directors in order to give an opinion. Obviously, if the directors produce the FS, and we're going to give our opinion on the FS, our opinion only has any meaning if we are independent from the directors. Otherwise, we'll just say the directors are great, they're doing a fine job, because we have no independence. So the shareholders can only rely on the auditor. The shareholders can only rely on the auditor if the auditor is independent from directors. That's the main principle. Actually, to be honest with you, I'm speaking very specifically about F8, but you must retain objectivity broadly. So the ACCA is saying auditors must be independent, but so must tax advisors, and so must ACCA systems consultants. ACCA systems consultants will give a better product if they're objective. But we're talking about F8. So F8, you've got to be independent, you've got to avoid conflicts of interest, you've got to have objectivity. The next one up is confidentiality. So confidentiality, it's just what it sounds like. You've got to keep the client's secrets. Again, of course, we're talking about F8, aren't we, an audit. And when you audit a client, you look at all their secret records, including, the director's pay and stuff like that, including the employee's pay. And you can't go talking about that down the pub. It's fairly obvious, really, isn't it? And that applies to, tax advisors. I was thinking about tax advisors. Tax advisors, they really get some, they get right down into the nitty-gritty of individuals' pay, don't they? And as Westerners tend to be fairly secretive about this. Let's face it, all as humans tend to be fairly secretive about this. So, confidentiality. You've got to keep confidentiality. Competence. Competence is making sure you know what you're doing. Competence is actually not such a big issue for you guys. Your competence is improving and improving and improving because you're doing your studies, and you're doing your studies now. But the process of retaining competence is the process of what's called continuing professional development. I doubt you've even heard this phrase, but once you become ACCA, then you will be competent to perform within your role, whether it's an auditor or, a tax specialist or whatever. But to retain your competence, you must keep up with the rules. So let's talk about audit, right? As soon as you pass the ACCA, you're definitely competent to do an audit, no problem. But 5 years later, the IFRSs have changed, right? So you must keep up with those IFRSs. And you keep up with them in a process called continuing professional development, and that's a requirement. Integrity. Seems obvious, doesn't it? You've got to be honest and straightforward in your dealings with everyone, especially with the shareholders, but also, with the employees, with the directors, with everyone. You've got to be straightforward and honest. That's the idea of integrity. The last concept is professionalism. Now, this is kind of the reason I've done this backwards is because professionalism basically is the other four. So if you have objectivity, confidentiality, competence and integrity, then you have professionalism. Do you see that? Okay? So professionalism is the other four. But there's a specific phrase that's used by the ACCA as a catch-all for professionalism. It's a little bit negative, frankly, but the phrase is, you must always behave in such a way that doesn't bring the ACCA into disrepute. It's a very odd phrase, isn't it? I don't like the phrase, to be honest with you, but that's the ACCA's phrase. It's got two negatives in there. Did you hear? Shall I say that again? You must always behave in such a way that doesn't bring the ACCA into disrepute. I think it'd be better if the ACCA says you must always behave in such a way that brings the ACCA into good repute. But no, the ACCA phrase it this way. They say you must always behave in such a way that doesn't bring the ACCA into disrepute. And you do that by doing the other four. Okay? That's the concepts within ethics.